Nonprofit professionals, have you thought about using gift cards? They're especially helpful this time of year. Think holiday gifts for the whole team, year end bonuses, and even direct support to families in need around the holidays. Charity Charge has a free gift card program just for nonprofits with no sign up fees or ordering minimums. Text or email a digital card for face value, no extra cost, or ship a physical card if you prefer. Let our team support your year end projects and save money on your gifting. Visit charitycharge.com to learn more and beat the holiday rush. Now, on to the episode. Thanks for tuning in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nonprofit Spotlight series hosted by Charity Charge. This is Grayson Harris, and today we are joined by John Bold. He's the executive director of Hume Christian Camps, and they're doing really incredible work actually across the country. They've expanded 3 locations. John, thank you so much for joining today.
Grayson, it's my pleasure. I love talking about ministry and things that we're doing and what God's doing in the life of the nonprofit world for us. So, yeah, love to
Well,
talk about it.
on that note, please share, with myself and our audience a little bit more about, your mission and what the camp's up to.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been around for about 80 years now here in California. We have 2 camps here in California, one in Monterey, Massachusetts. So, as we continue to expand over the course of that 80 years, we serve about 50,000 campers a year, really around the mission of, for us, it's really about the gospel. How do we share what Christ has done? I could just recite the mission statement for you. It's a long statement, but it's really about presenting Christ, giving campers an opportunity to respond to the gospel, to grow in their faith while they're here, partnership with the local church, and then ultimately plant themselves, Lord willing, wherever He might direct them around the world to serve in Him. We have alumni about, 1.5, 1.6 million alum that have been campers in the ministry over the course of time, and many of them in pastoral roles, youth pastor roles, volunteers, doctors, lawyers. Being in California, we have embedded quite a few alum in the tech sector. We're not very far from Silicon Valley, so our kids come from as college students after they're campers. Then they come to work for summer, and then we launch them off on a career where they serve the Lord in their church and in their job and what He calls them to that way. So that's really our mission as we pour into the lives of kids.
That's incredible. And, can you give a little bit more context into your journey within the organization and
Yeah.
kind of how you arrived?
Yeah, I came into the camping world from higher education. I was in the development fundraising world in higher education at a couple of different schools, involved in some churches in philanthropy and giving and those pieces, and then was invited to come to Hume Christian Camps in January of 2017 to really launch a development program. Bring some of that, especially as we're growing in Southern California, growing into New England, an expansion, really in an expansion mode, and did that for about 7 years. And then the Lord opened up the opportunity. My predecessor had moved on, and they asked me to step into the role. So I stepped into it 3 years ago now as executive director or CEO of this ministry. And it's been a great journey just to see that the ministry partners is what we call our donors. I mean, those folks that just love what we do and love the mission. Many of them were impacted by the camp. When you've been around 80 years, we now have, I think this last summer, a fourth generation camper arrive at camp. So, I mean, grandparents, great grandparents came as campers in the 40s and 50s. And we've grown and developed as a ministry and organization, really focusing around that youth culture in the local church. I mean, to me, that's what makes the strength of Hume who we are. It's not just a mountaintop experience, come as an individual, go back to wherever you might be planted. But that partnership with the local church for us is so critical because we see that 1 week that we spend with a camper for the next 51 weeks, they're going to be embedded in their youth group, be leaders in their youth group, leaders in their high schools, leaders on their athletic teams. We do football camps with schools as part of our ministry in the month of May. We bring 500 football players a weekend for the month of May and just pour into them. So they're athletic leaders and what God's going to do with them, and then local leaders in their churches. It's an exciting ministry opportunity. And then we have adult ministries and we do some adult retreats and couples retreats and men's fishermen's conference. And we do we have a first responders conference and just trying to pour in as they represent the Lord wherever He may plant them in a vocation, in the homes, but always going back to that partnership with the local church because that's so critical. And we believe, and we've seen it for 80 years. And we believe God's going to work. When you present the word of God clearly, present the gospel clearly, it's his responsibility. We've seen him work in so many amazing ways over the course of times. I could share story after story of how he's impacting the lives of kids through the camping ministry.
And, the part that you mentioned, I really would like to highlight is that collaboration with your community. And I think that was what really stood out to me whenever we had our initial conversation is kind of what you mentioned. How are you making sure that that involvement is kind of not just within the camp itself, but is actually long lasting and sustainable? Can you
Yes.
speak a little bit more to the philosophy of when they initially started and had that approach for the camp? Has it always been that way? And then, really, what have been the benefits that y'all have seen
Yeah.
from that
You know,
approach?
it's been a fascinating journey. In the 46, I think, is when we started, and we were really just kind of a Christian conference center. It's like build it out in our first site here in California in the Sierra Nevadas, beautiful, spectacular creation of God. And the early days were come as a denomination. 40s, 50s denominationalism was strong. So, for instance, American Baptists would take week 4 of the summer and they would bring all the American Baptist churches from California would come for a week of camp. And one of the things that began to happen is as time changed and culture changed, it began to, instead of just providing housing and food for campers, why don't we begin to continue to grow and develop some programmatic things? And what began to happen was, which really that's where the solidity of our partnership with the local church came into being. It was like now in the 70s, 80s, really the as it began to bloom, let us take responsibility for providing great housing, providing great food, providing all the recreational needs. Then we began to provide speakers and worship bands for everything so that that youth pastor and that local church just come, let us do all of the stuff of camp, and then they can just be with their kids. Fast forward to 2026, this coming summer, we'll take the biblical theme. We're going to do the life of David in the Psalms, will be the theme. So the chapel services will be around the Psalms. We'll provide a worship band and do the worship. We do recreation, and we see kind of a funnel. Break them into 2 teams, and we'll have in the high school camp, we'll have 1,000 kids a week. And so we'll take and split them into 2 groups of 500. Then we break them down into smaller groups and finally down to their cabin area where they'll have the most conversation and the one-on-one time. So they'll hear the message in chapel. We see recreation as a chance for them to, kids come to camp, arms folded. Yeah, mom made me come to camp, or dad sent us here. Our church came. Oh, we came. But then to begin to see their arms unfold through recreation, through God's creation, and then to see the word impact them, the Spirit of God speak to their hearts, and then in the chapel service, respond to the gospel, and then go back to their cabin where they'll be with their youth pastor or a youth worker from their church to have those one-on-one 1 to 8, 1 to 9 conversations that take place in that cabin environment, knowing that they're gonna be the ones then that go home with the student. They're gonna see that same counselor as their youth volunteer or their youth pastor next Wednesday at youth group meeting or Sunday night when they have their youth group. That partnership, let us take care of the details so you can just be with your students. So they can hang out by the lake, or they're hanging out by the pool, or they're up in a ropes course with their youth pastor or their youth worker, just having conversations, getting to know them as people. And in today's world and culture, obviously, I mean, our teens, they spend what, 8, 9, 10 hours a day on the screen outside the context. You come to camp, come to the mountains,
No
cell phone
Wi-Fi,
service,
no data.
it's extremely poor at best, so the phone doesn't work other than to be a camera, and so then it unplugs them, and all the studies that we're doing with Gen Z and Gen Alpha that's coming, it's really around the idea of if you can get away from it for a day or 2 days, they begin to have face-to-face interactions again with people, and that God's created us to be relational, and as those relationships grow and develop, and then the gospel infuses that, we're seeing lives changed every summer as kids just like, I'm giving up the cell phone as self service for a season, for a week in this case, but then see how that'll grow and develop with that local
Yeah.
church. So that theme, like this next summer around David, around his life and the Psalms, I mean, it answers all the cultural questions that kids have today. It's like when I'm aching, when I feel anxiety, David wrote extensively, and other psalmists extensively about what do I do when my heart aches? I turn to God. I turn to the Creator. I turn to the one who sent his son. All of those things, the biblical truths that we get to do at camp in partnership is just an amazing thing.
I thank you for all of that context, and you spoke
Yeah.
to some really important themes I kinda wanna talk to, so, like, some of the challenges, right, that the youth are facing, and, overall,
Yes.
broadly as well, the nonprofit ecosystem as well has faced a lot of challenges this year, be it funding, a government shutdown. How has that, affected, your organization in any way, and, what are some challenges that maybe the public doesn't understand that go into running a camp, at the scale of Hume?
Yeah, I think that the greater challenges that we face are how do we continue with the regulatory environment? You hear all about that all the time, but especially in California, we lead the world in regulations and regulatory things. I think the challenges that affect us that way, if California continues to push minimum wage. One of the great challenges we face is the price of camp. How do we continue to make it affordable? That's why we run an extensive campership. We call it camperships. It's really scholarships with our ministry partners and donors that help fund. I think this last year we're going to cross the $1.4 million in camperships provided by our donors to keep camp affordable. I think if that's
Kinda
one drum,
supplementing the cost, right? Because
yes,
it is a bit of an earned revenue model as well with the camp, right? The
absolutely.
churches that are coming out are helping fund for the kids.
Yeah, yeah. The great challenge of any ministry is you have the ministry side, you believe in the mission so strongly, but then there's the business component of it too.
Yeah,
Minimum wage in California in the 9, 10 years I've been back in California, minimum wage has gone from $10 an hour. We're now at 16, I think it's 16.50, 16.60. And we hire, 100 counselors, staff every summer, that adds up pretty quickly. So it's how do we balance that regulatory environment? That's what I put minimum wage as a regulation that the state puts in, and we follow all the, we constantly are doing our very best to make sure we're compliant with all the pieces and parts of regulation in both states, California and Massachusetts for us. And so I think that's probably the biggest challenge. We have a marvelous working relationship with the national park and the national service, National Park Service.
wildlife,
Yeah, because we're private property in the middle of millions of acres of federal
yeah.
land, and
How
those
are you being good
relationships are.
stewards of that land
Yes.
in
Yep,
partnership?
and we see that as a biblical mandate. God told Adam in the garden, "Tend to the garden that he created for them," and we hold that very seriously in everything we do at every location of how do we tend it, how do we take care, maintain, and then obviously in California, fires are always, they're always on the horizon. How do we make sure that we are cleaning up the camp, that we don't have dead trees or
Great.
fallen brush or any of those things, and a great relationship. We have our own fire department and a volunteer fire department and an emergency management system, because when you have, at any given week in the summer, 3,000 kids at camp, kids are active
Yeah,
and the mountains are fun, and you bring those 2 together, but we work hard at all of those things, and those are the challenges that we face
yeah.
as a ministry, but, God continues to provide as he always said he would, and he does. But those are the things that, I think the great challenges that we face. The affordability question is really the challenge.
How do you keep it
Insurance.
affordable for campers and
Yep.
also paying
Property
staff?
insurance, fire insurance,
Understood.
the regulations of California, the camp size, cabin size, all of those pieces. And we take those things very seriously. We see, God's put government in place, and we do our best and we continue to work at it and improve when we build a new dormitory or new cabin, or, we're working through all of those things to be sure it's built to code, and all of those pieces are just the journey of doing camp so that we
Understood.
can take the gospel and get at the kids and to partner with that church.
Such an important part that you mentioned is the challenges of that mission piece versus that business side. And I think that's
Mhm.
something that every single nonprofit works and balances with. And it's a kind of a tug of war, right, between those two sides. How are you communicating, internally within your team, making sure that everybody is leading mission forward, but is doing so in a strategic way that is kind of creating a sustainable future for the organization
Yes.
as well?
Well, yeah, we as a leadership team, we meet on a weekly basis and have a great board of oversight that they're making sure budgets, when we build our budgets out, what is how can we best do it? What's the safest way? That safety is always a factor in all of that. But we talk constantly about what I always say, you're never ministering to an empty bed. And the empty bed is the business model side, but there's also a ministry side reality. If that bed's not full, if that bed doesn't have a camper in it, A, we're not generating revenue and we're not fulfilling the mission with who could be in that bed. So that piece, fundraising is always a part of what we do in the nonprofit world. It always will be. And God continues to supply with some amazing donors that love the ministry, love the mission of what we do. And so you're always talking about those things. What I always tell, those summer staffers that come in, we have, like I said, 500 of them. So when I get the chance to engage with them and stuff, I said, you're in the front line of the ministry. You get to be with the kids. You're climbing the trees with them. You're hanging out in the ropes course. But as you invest in the ministry, as you grow into the ministry, the higher up you develop in the leadership side of camp, in any nonprofit, the more you have to think the business side of what we're doing. So we spent a lot of time as a leadership team thinking about building our budgets, cost of camp, the fundraising aspect of it. We talk about these on a regular basis. Are there ways? One of the reasons why we want to become a FireWise community is it lowers our insurance rates. You have to have it, so it's a part of the business, but we know that's important because that means kids will be able to come and we can keep that price of
The
camp
affordability.
in the affordability range. I spend 65, 70% of my time thinking
Thinking
and
through that challenge.
processing, and there's 25% out in the fundraising world of just help us
Making
do what we do.
connections. Yep.
Yep.
Love that. Well, and, as we come to the end of the year, what does the future bring, for the camp, and what's got you excited?
The thing I get most excited about that we're currently doing is when you're 80 years old, and as I see that 80 is not as far away as I once thought it was physically for me, but things start to break down. And camps is no different. When you bring 600 middle schoolers into the chapel,
A lot of wear and tear.
it's a lot of wear and tear. So we're at the lake facility. We're about to launch, or we did launch recently, about a 60, $70 million capital campaign to refurbish. We need a new chapel. Our middle school's busting at the seams. We put up a temporary tent chapel. It was supposed to be a 3-year project. That was 15 years ago. It's time to replace that. Middle schoolers are hard on things. Remodeling our dining facilities at the lake specifically. How do we continue to modernize? Because there's also some affordability pieces of that as
More
donors step
energy
up to help
efficient,
us.
more water
Energy.
efficient. Yep.
Exactly. All of those things are what we think about all the time. So the board just approved that campaign. We're about to launch a similar campaign in the Southern California campus
Amazing.
because as we continue to expand that, it's the same thing. It's how do we build energy efficient buildings that keep it efficient, keep it cost affordable, but yet get more kids at camp. The demand that we're seeing for camp continues to increase because I think as parents, as churches realize if we can get them off their screens and it lowers the anxiety, the screen in our culture, all the research tells us that anxiety level, we're seeing it more and more even in the public square. They're talking about the stress, the anxiety of our teens. Suicide rates are increasing,
Loneliness epidemic.
pornography stuff, the self-harm, all of those things that come out of, some great technological inventions has isolated our kids. And camp, when you bring them with, like I go back to that middle school example, when you bring 500 middle schoolers together, there's interaction. It's loud, it's exciting, it's fun, and you bring all that together, it begins to lower their you can see the anxiety rates. My office sits almost in the middle of middle school camp. I have a creek that runs in front of my office, and the kids playing it all the time. To see those middle schoolers, the phone's gone. They're catching tadpoles. They're just laughing. To hear them laugh, to hear them scream with excitement when man, I caught 10 tadpoles, and it doesn't matter if it's a boy or girl, they're doing it together. All that tension that comes from their culture of school and all of that melts away in that tech context of come have fun. You bring them into chapel, you present the good news of Christ. The scriptures are clear. He resolves the anxiety. I think is what there's 365 verses in scripture about anxiety, one for every day that he carries our burdens, and to see them respond to that. And I could tell story after story of kids that came hurting themselves, harming themselves. We're giving teenage boys a phone a full device in the middle of the night. Pornography with our young men in our culture is rampant. And just it creates inside this sense of anxiety and tension and loneliness and self worth, all of those things that scripture's so clear about. Now you put with the love letter from God in the middle of his creation, we see lives changed. And that's to me, that's what gets me up every day. That's why to me it's worth wrestling with the cost of camp and affordability and building
At
buildings that are
80%
energy efficient. It's like that's all important. I got to do that, but I do all of that. We do all of that as a
for the mission.
ministry for the mission of what we do.
Well, John, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing more about the work that y'all are doing and the incredible camps that are helping run. So thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure, Grayson. I love talking about the ministry of camping. It's a pleasure to meet you and spend some time just talking about this world.